You've heard it your whole life. The pirate voice, gravelly, booming, sprinkled with mateys, and that one unforgettable growl. Arrr. From Halloween costumes to Hollywood blockbusters, it feels authentic, doesn't it? As if every rogue who ever flew the Jolly Roger spoke exactly like that. But here's the secret. They didn't. Imagine stepping aboard Blackbeard's ship in 1717. You expect him to bark in that familiar movie accent, but instead you hear something different. West Country drawls from Cornwall, lilting Irish brogues, harsh Cockney slang, and even African, Caribbean, and indigenous voices all tangled together. The deck is alive with curses in half a dozen tongues. You'd hear Dutch, French, and Spanish spat in anger, African Creoles whispered in planning, and English that didn't sound like anything we'd call pirate today. So where did the R come from? Why does it cling to our imagination like barnacles on a hull? The truth is stranger and more fascinating than the legend. It begins not on the high seas, but in a quiet theatre in Cornwall, where an actor's voice would forever change how the world imagined piracy. Tonight, we'll peel back the curtain. We'll chase the real voices of the Golden Age of Piracy. From the crowded streets of London to the sugar islands of the Caribbean, from Bristol taverns to Spanish galleons, we'll hear what the men and women who lived this bloody trade actually sounded like. And along the way, you'll discover why the pirate accent you know so well isn't just wrong, it's a ghost born of theatre, myth, and memory. And by the time you know the truth, you may never hear Arrr the same way again. So, do you dare step closer and listen? Good. Then let's begin with a question that would have stunned you if you'd ever walked onto a pirate deck yourself. What language would you even have heard first? Step onto a pirate deck in the early 1700s, and you will be struck not first by the smell of tar or gunpowder, but by the sound. It is a clamour, a storm of voices, each one distinct, clashing like steel against steel. There is no single pirate accent. There never was. Instead, the ship is a floating tower of Babel. Imagine Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge. She carried nearly 300 souls at her peak, and they were drawn from every port, every gutter, every battlefield that fed the sea with men. There were Englishmen from London, their vowels sharp and clipped, spitting Cockney slang thick as fog. West Country farmers turned sailors, their speech rolling and musical, thick with eyes and oohs, long before theatre caught on. Irishmen shouted with lilting fury, while Scots barked orders in rough Highland tones, and it did not end with Britain. Pirates took what they needed from every coast. French sailors cursed in their nasal growl, Spaniards barked defiance, Dutchmen muttered gutturals between puffs of pipe smoke. From Africa came men who had survived chains, speaking Wolof, Igbo, and Akan, mixing them with the pidgins of Barbados and Jamaica. Freedmen and escaped slaves spoke Creoles that blended English, Spanish, and African rhythms. Indigenous sailors from the Caribbean brought their own tongues, woven with the cadences of survival. All of it collided on deck. Orders were shouted in English, aye, but punctuated with curses in every language known to man. A captain might call, "Heave to," and half a dozen men would answer in words you wouldn't understand, but they'd haul the ropes just the same. Alonso, a Spaniard I once sailed with, liked to tease me. "Your English is sharp, like a knife, amigo. Mine is rough, like an oar. But the sea, she doesn't care. She understands both." It was true. The sea bred a new tongue, nautical English. Words like ahoy, avars, scallywag, some born from Dutch, some from French, many from Old English dialects, forgotten on land but alive at sea. The accent wasn't a performance. It was necessity, a blending, a creole of survival. In the taverns of Nassau, you'd hear it more strongly still. Imagine a room thick with rum smoke, sailors packed shoulder to shoulder, roaring songs. One man belts out in Irish, another answers in a bawdy French rhyme. A third slams his mug and spits out a curse in London slang so filthy it turns heads. A freed African laughs, adds a verse in Creole, and the room erupts in cheers. That was the pirate accent, not a single sound, but a chorus. And yet, among all these tongues, one stood out. The West Country drawl, slow and rolling, became so tied to sailors in the British Navy and merchant service that when writers and actors later reached for a sea voice, that was the one they took. It carried across generations, from Bristol fishermen to London stages, until one man in the mid-20th century, actor with a flair for exaggeration, took it, twisted it, and made it eternal. But before we meet him, let us linger a little longer on those true voices, on the way pirates really sounded when they cursed, threatened, and sang on the high seas. Because once you've heard their chaos, you'll understand just how strange it is that the world remembers only one word, Arrr. Step ashore from Nassau's smoky taverns, or Ocracoke's sandy shallows, and follow me back across the Atlantic to a very different coast. England's southwest Devon, Cornwall, Dorset, and Somerset. A land of rugged cliffs, green fields, fishing villages tucked in coves, and accents as thick and rolling as the waves they faced. If you want to find the real seed of the pirate voice, you must begin here. The West Country has always spoken differently. Long before pirates ruled the Caribbean, farmers and fishermen in Cornwall stretched their vowels until they lilted like song. An I became oi, au turned into thee, there stretched into thir. Their speech was slow, musical, and to outsiders, strange. Add to that their habit of punctuating sentences with grunts, sighs, and guttural fillers, and you already have the bones of a voice that would carry across oceans. In Bristol taverns, you could hear it most strongly. Picture it, dockside pubs thick with tar-smelling sailors, their mugs sloshing with ale, their talk rough but merry. "Aye, thir she be, lads," one fisherman would mutter, pointing to a merchantman riding at anchor. His friend would laugh, rolling his R's until they purred like the tide. "Ah, Anne, she's fat with cargo, so she'll be." These weren't pirates yet. They were fishermen, traders, smugglers, but their accents, carried to sea, became the default sound of English sailors across the Atlantic. When England pushed men into the Royal Navy, it often drew heavily from these counties. Coastal villages were stripped of sons, press-ganged into service. West Countrymen, with their oar vowels and sing-song speech, became the backbone of crews. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, when piracy flared, many of those same sailors deserted. They fled Navy brutality and hunger for freedom, and when they joined pirate crews, they brought their voices with them. It meant that on many decks, amid the chaos of languages, one accent carried strong, the West Country burr, not universal, not dominant everywhere, but familiar enough that when outsiders later imagined a sailor's voice, it was this accent that came to mind. The accent itself has quirks that explain so much of what we now hear in pirate talk. First, the rolling R. Linguists call it rhotic speech, the habit of fully pronouncing R sounds. Where Londoners would flatten car into k, a Cornish sailor would bark it sharp, car that Burr carried over the sea wind like a cannon shot. Orders shouted in this accent stuck in memory. Second, their vowels stretched wide. Time became toim, there became thur, me became moi. Listen to a West country farmer today and you hear echoes of what sailors must have sounded like 300 years ago. Third, the interjections. Arrr, I. They weren't words of performance. They were habits of speech. A grunt to fill silence. A growl of agreement. A bark of frustration. A sailor from Cornwall didn't invent Arrr, for theatre it was already in his daily talk. Muttered when a net tore or shouted when a wave hit the bow. Imagine a pirate fight. Swords clashing, pistols firing, and over it all a chorus of curses. A Londoner spits, bloody L. A Frenchman cries, M. And a Cornishman bellows, Ah, have at the. That sound, sharp and fierce, stuck in memory. But memory alone wasn't enough. For centuries, pirates had many voices. Why did this one win the crown? Because the West Country accent carried beyond the sea, onto the stage. The 18th and 19th centuries saw a boom in nautical plays and novels. Playwrights and authors wanted their sailors to sound authentic, so they listened to the accents most associated with sailors in ports Bristol, Plymouth, Cornwall. Characters began to speak in exaggerated West Country tones, their RS heavy, their phrases peppered with I and R. Audiences in London, unfamiliar with real pirate chaos, latched onto it. By the time Robert Louis Stevenson wrote Treasure Island in 1883, the template was ready. Long John Silver, that cunning pirate, was written to sound rough, seafaring, and distinctly West Country. Lines like I, matey, were not inventions of Hollywood, they were echoes of real dialect. Shaped by fiction, yet the real explosion came later. In the 20th century, in 1950, Disney released a film version of Treasure Island. The role of Long John Silver went to Robert Newton, a British actor born in where else? Dorset, in the heart of the West Country. Newton leaned into his own heritage, exaggerating his native burr until it became larger than life. He rolled his R's like thunder, stretched his vowels like sails, and punctuated his speech with growls of R. Audiences were transfixed. Children imitated him, actors copied him, and suddenly, one man's performance cemented centuries of scattered accents into a single, unforgettable sound. Newton didn't invent the pirate voice, but he distilled centuries of West Country influence, theatrical tradition, and sailor slang into the accent we all know. From that day, pirates in popular culture spoke not with London slang, not with Irish lilt, not with African Creole. They spoke like Robert Newton, like the exaggerated West Countrymen who had filled the Navy's ranks and piracy's decks centuries earlier. But back in the Golden Age, those accents weren't theatre. They were life. Picture it, a Cornish sailor standing on deck, squinting into the horizon. He mutters to himself, Ah, storm's brewin', so it be. His mate beside him laughs, answering in a sharper London tone. Together they haul ropes, their voices clashing but blending into the rhythm of the ship. Later, in a tavern in Jamaica, the same sailor tells a tale of battle. His R's rolling like cannonballs, his I punctuating every claim. The listeners laugh, not because he sounds like a caricature, but because he sounds real, earthy, alive. That was the pirate accent, not uniform, not singular, but flavoured heavily by the West Country drawl that travelled farther than any other. And there's one more secret about why it lasted. Songs, sea shanties. Those work songs shouted to keep rhythm, carried accent more than anything. West country vowels dragged across melodies, echoed in choruses, lodged in memory. Heave ho, me hearties wasn't just a phrase. It was a song, sung in rhotic tones, vowels stretched long, hammered into the ears of every sailor who joined in. When later writers collected shanties, they wrote them down with the sounds they heard. Yo ho ho, ah, I. They weren't trying to create stereotypes. They were recording the cadences of real voices. But on paper, stripped of context, those voices became frozen caricatures. So when you hear yo ho ho and a bottle of rum, remember, it once carried the accent of Cornwall fishermen, echoing across a heaving deck as men hauled at lines in unison. The West Country accent shaped piracy's sound, but it was only one voice among many. Still, it became the loudest in memory. Why? Because it was distinctive. Because it rolled and sang and carried across storm and cannon smoke. Because it made its way from ship to stage to screen. And because, when Robert Newton bellowed Arrr into cinema history, he wasn't just acting. He was channeling centuries of sailors, fishermen, and rogues who had already been saying it, muttering it, shouting it, long before the world imagined it as fantasy. And that is why, when you imagine a pirate, you don't hear London slang or Irish curses. You hear the West Country echo. But here's the twist. If you'd stood in Nassau in 1717, surrounded by pirates of every nation, you might not have heard Arrr at all. You might have heard French curses, Dutch songs, African Creole, or Spanish growls. So why did we forget those voices? Why does only one accent remain in our memory? The answer lies not in the sea, but in the stories we chose to tell, and the ones we chose to forget. Step onto a pirate deck in 1717, and you would not hear one voice or one accent, but a storm of sounds so chaotic and layered that it could overwhelm the senses. Because the truth about piracy is that it was never one tongue, never one cadence, but a babel of voices clashing and weaving like rigging in a storm. The sound of the world itself compressed onto the planks of a creaking wooden ship. Yes, the West Country burr gave us the famous Arrr, but London spat its Cockney bite. Ireland sang its lilting fury, Africa drummed its rhythms. The Caribbean created new creoles, and French, Dutch, and Spanish curses cut through the din. So let us walk among them and listen, in London's East End, where sailors filled Wappings, taverns, and Limehouse's alleys. The Cockney voice was sharp as broken glass, dropping its H's and flattening its vowels. So a pirate born on those docks would snarl at a trembling merchant captain, not with theatrical growls, but with clipped menace. And it over mate, or I'll spill your guts all over the place. A voice that bit like a knife, a voice born of hunger and smoke, and these Cockney sailors, press-ganged or fleeing poverty, poured into the navy and piracy alike. Their accents despised by officers but feared by victims. Sharp curses spat faster than musket fire, while across the Irish Sea, men who had been driven by famine, war, and English cruelty carried their voices into the sea, their brogues lilting and rolling, every cursed half-song, every threat tinged with melody. So when an Irish pirate shouted by God's teeth, "Ye'll hand it ora, or I'll split thee from ear to ear," it carried a rhythm that chilled the blood, even as the same man broke into song in a shanty, his crew roaring the chorus, the sound half hymn, half battle cry. And then there were the Africans, perhaps the most forgotten voices of all, dragged across the ocean in chains, many dying, but some escaping, some freed, some seizing their chance in mutiny, and those who joined pirate crews spoke a blend of languages: Igbo, Akan, mixed with English, Spanish, Portuguese, creating pidgins and creoles that pulsed with rhythm. So when one shouted, "Hole, brooder, hole, tide, be strong tonight," his cadence cut through wind and rain with clarity, his English not broken but a weapon as sharp as his cutlass. And in truth, on some decks Africans made up half the crew, their voices shaping the sound of piracy in ways later stories erased. And if you sailed the Caribbean, you would hear more Creoles, born of sugar islands where languages collided daily. So a pirate from Jamaica or Tortuga might shout, "De captain, he won de treasure noun, hold a rope quick quick," in a rhythm outsiders might not understand, but his shipmates did, clipped, doubled, alive with urgency, laughter, and music, because these Creoles turned orders into songs, curses into rhymes, survival into new tongues. While nearby, a French buccaneer snarled through his nose, "Donnie Law, Veet, Veet," and his Dutch comrade barked, "Sneller, Sneller," their sounds harsh and foreign, filling the air with threats, even if the victim understood not a word. And then came the Spaniards, men from Havana or Cartagena, their voices fast, vowels sharp, cursis sharp esistiu, rápido pejo, their Catholic oaths ringing with fury, Madre de Dios carajo, words that English pirates mocked yet feared, because even without understanding, the sound promised death. Put all this together and you have the true soundscape of piracy, not the neat growl of Arrr, but a chorus of chaos. So imagine a sloop bearing down on a merchantman, the crew erupting in madness. A Cornish sailor bellows, "I'll bring her to..." A Cockney snarls, "Get that bloody rope, mate." An Irishman sings out, "Heave, boys, heave." A freed African shouts in Creole, "Pull, brother, pull hard now." A Frenchman curses, a Spaniard spits, a Dutchman growls, and over it all the thunder of cannon, the shriek of wood, the cries of the terrified merchant crew who hear this storm of voices and feel their courage collapse, not because of the words but because of the sheer madness of them, as if demons themselves had risen from the sea to devour them. And here lies piracy's greatest weapon, not only the blade, not only the ball, but fear born of the unknown, fear of hearing the whole world's anger crash upon you at once. Yet history forgot these voices, simplified them, flattened them, erased them, because writers wanted clarity, not chaos, and audiences wanted one voice, not a dozen, so Cockney, Irish, African, French, Spanish whole were lost, buried like wrecks beneath shifting sands, while the West Country burr, already tied to Navy men and Bristol traders, sailed onto the stage and into Stevenson's Treasure Island, then into Robert Newton's growling throat in 1950, and the chorus of piracy was reduced to a solo, an R that drowned all else. And yet, if you listen closely, in the fragments of shanties, in the scattered diary entries of captured sailors, in the Creoles still spoken in the Caribbean, you can still hear them whispering through time, voices of the forgotten, voices that once made piracy terrifying not only because of its violence, but because of its sound. And so I leave you with this question, one that gnaws like a worm in the wood. What would it feel like to stand in the middle of that storm of voices? To be a young sailor pressed into piracy, hearing half a dozen languages shouted at once, none your own. Surrounded by chaos that sounded less like men and more like the sea itself, screaming through human mouths, would it sound like freedom, or would it sound like hell? If you want to know how the voice of pirates turned from a storm of real accents into the single theatrical growl we know today, you have to follow the echo. Voices, once shouted across decks, carried on in taverns, in songs, in ballads, in penny broadsides passed from hand to hand. And then they stepped into the world of theatre, literature, and later cinema retelling, trimming the chaos, simplifying the noise, until what had been a Tower of Babel was reduced to one unforgettable caricature. The truth was buried like a wreck beneath sand, and myth rose like a phantom ship above it. Picture a London tavern in 1725, smoky and thick with the smell of ale. A ballad singer stands on a table, strumming a fiddle, his voice carrying verses about brave Captain Roberts, bold as brass, who robbed the Spaniard o' his gold. The crowd roars in delight. But notice something. The singer doesn't perform Roberts's real accent. He doesn't know it, or care. He bends the words into a broad, comic voice his audience will recognize, rhotic, drawling, exaggerated. He plays to stereotype, not truth, and in that moment the pirate's voice begins to drift from reality into legend. Broadsides did the same. Cheaply printed sheets sold in the streets told tales of captured pirates, their last dying speeches written in thick dialect to make them colorful. The words might be invented, the accent exaggerated, but they were designed to sell, and they planted seeds in the public's imagination. This is how a pirate sounds. By the mid-18th century, plays began to stage pirates as stock villains. Audiences demanded a recognizable sound, something distinct from noble officers or comic peasants. Playwrights turned to the West Country accent, already tied to sailors in the Royal Navy, and heightened it for drama. They exaggerated the rolling R's, the guttural growls, the I's and airs that audiences found both amusing and menacing. In the process, the messy reality of Cockney curses, Irish songs, African creoles, and Spanish oaths was scrubbed away. What remained was a single, sound-familiar, theatrical, effective. Fast forward to 1883, Robert Louis Stevenson publishes Treasure Island, and the world of pirates changes forever. Stevenson's Long John Silver is cunning, charismatic, and most of all, distinctive in speech. Stevenson had travelled through the West Country and knew the accent. He gave Silver the growls, the mateys, the sing-song rhythm. Readers devoured it. The book became a sensation, and for the first time, a mass audience imagined pirates speaking not as a chorus of voices, but in a singular burr. Long John Silver's accent became the default, cemented further by stage adaptations that gave actors freedom to ham it up for laughs and thrills. Now picture the theatre in late Victorian London. The curtain rises, the spotlight cuts through smoke, and an actor hobbles across the stage on a peg leg, squawking orders in a voice that booms. Avast there, the lubbers. Yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. The crowd howls in delight. Children gasp, adults laugh, and critics scribble notes. That accent trolling, RS guttural growls, words peppered with R's, wasn't authentic, but it was perfect for the stage. It was colourful, memorable, and easy to imitate. And once it stuck in the theatre, it spread everywhere by the early 20th century. Piracy in popular culture was inseparable from this voice. Silent films featured pirates with intertitles filled with matey and avast. Stage pantomimes exaggerated it further. turning pirate speech into comic relief. And then came the final blow. Robert Newton. In 1950, Disney released Treasure Island, with Newton as Long John Silver. Born in Dorset, Newton leaned into his West Country heritage, twisting it into a roaring, theatrical performance. He rolled his R's until they shook the rafters. He bellowed "Ah!" with such force that children squealed and adults imitated him walking home. Overnight, Newton's voice became the pirate voice, not just in England but worldwide. Why did it stick? Because Newton's performance distilled centuries of stereotype into one unforgettable sound. The accent was strange enough to feel foreign, but English enough to be understood. It was both comic and threatening, easy for children to mimic, easy for actors to parody. Newton played Silver again in Long John Silver and a TV series, repeating the performance until it became iconic. Other actors copied him. Halloween costumes imitated him. Theme parks built animatronics with his voice. What had once been one of many authentic accents became the only one remembered. But while Newton gave the world its pirate voice, the truth remained buried. Cockney pirates were forgotten, their curses smoothed away. Irish shanties were ignored, too melodic for Hollywood's gruff stereotype. African voices and Caribbean creoles were erased entirely, victims of racism and neglect, despite their massive presence on real decks. French and Spanish pirates became villains with heavy stereotypes in films, but never allowed to shape the pirate sound. Only the West Country burr survived, inflated into caricature, and yet echoes of the truth survive if you know where to listen. In shanties collected by folklorists, you can hear Irish rhythms, African cadences, Cockney slang. In sailors' diaries, written phonetically, you glimpse accents that don't match the Hollywood growl. In the Caribbean today, English creoles still carry the cadence of pirates, living voices of men who history tried to silence. So here's the haunting irony, the "ah" you know so well isn't false, it's just one fragment of the truth, plucked from a chorus and amplified until it drowned all others. Pirates did growl "ah" sometimes, but so did West Country farmers and fishermen back home, long before they ever hoisted black flags. What Newton gave us was not invention, but distortion turning a real sound into a global shorthand. Imagine standing in a Victorian theatre, watching an actor stomp and roar in a West Country accent. The crowd laughs, thrilled, scared. Now imagine standing on Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge, surrounded by Cockney curses, Irish songs, African shouts, French and Spanish oaths, and the rolling West Country burr. The difference is staggering. One is theatre, crafted for clarity. The other is chaos, alive, terrifying. And yet history chose theatre. That choice shaped our imaginations forever. The pirate voice that survives is not wrong, it is simply incomplete. A ghost of a much bigger truth. A truth the stage, the page, and the screen decided was too messy to remember. So next time you hear our matey, ask yourself, whose voices are missing? Whose accents were drowned? And what might the sea itself say, if it could speak for all the forgotten tongues that once cried out upon it? By the mid-20th century, the sea had grown quiet. Real pirates were long gone, the Caribbean patrolled by navies, the Atlantic given to merchant lanes. But in theatres, in books, and soon in films, piracy was alive like never before. Children dreamed of treasure maps, parents thrilled to swashbuckling adventures, and the voice of the pirate loud, rolling, theatrical grew, stronger with each retelling. Yet the more popular the voice became, the further it drifted from the truth. It all began with Robert Newton. His 1950 performance in Disney's Treasure Island had already reshaped the pirate myth. His West Country burr stretched until it was almost parody. But Newton didn't stop there. He reprised Long John Silver in 1954's Return to Treasure Island and even a television series, cementing his art as the sound of piracy itself. He was not the first actor to exaggerate a West Country accent, but he was the one who made it unforgettable. The way he curled his lip, rolled his R's like cannonballs, and growled every mate he turned the voice into a spell. Newton, more than any pirate of history, defined how the world would forever imagine them. And then came Hollywood's golden age of adventure films. Douglas Fairbanks had leapt across decks in silent films. Errol Flynn had swung from rigging in Captain Blood and the Seahawk. And while they didn't lean as heavily into Newton's growl, they laid the groundwork. Pirates as charming rogues, dangerous but magnetic. By the time Newton stormed the stage, the mold was ready. Every pirate after him would be forced into that accent, whether they wanted it or not. Soon the R grew louder. Theatrical adaptations of Treasure Island around the world copied Newton's voice. Children imitated it in playgrounds. Halloween costumes came with instructions to say, "Ah, matey." It became less about realism and more about play, about performance. Pirates had become characters as much as historical figures, and their voice was the costume you wore even when you had no hat or sword. Hollywood reinforced it again in the 1960s and 70s, when family films and TV series recycled the stereotype. But the real game changer came not on screen, but in a theme park. In 1967, Disneyland unveiled Pirates of the Caribbean, the ride that would become legend. Guests floated past animatronic pirates with glowing eyes, snarling faces, and most importantly Newton's voice pouring from their wooden jaws. The ride's soundtrack was filled with growls of Avast, the scurvy dogs, drink up, me hearties, and, of course, endless R. These weren't based on documents or sailor journals. They were based on the Newton caricature, written into scripts by Disney's Imagineers who knew audiences wanted pirates to sound exactly like that. The ride's song, Yo-Ho, A Pirate's Life for Me, hammered it in further. Millions of families rode, laughed, and came away convinced. This is how pirates talked. From then on, the pirate voice wasn't just a movie trope. It was global. Children's cartoons picked it up. Puppets bellowed it. Toys came packaged with ad, printed on their boxes. The accent spread like wildfire through pop culture until it was inseparable from the image of a pirate. No child asked why pirates spoke like men from Cornwall. No adult wondered why all the diversity of real voices had vanished. It was enough that the voice was fun, recognizable, and larger than life. In the 1980s, the stereotype was so entrenched that it became parody. Comic sketches mocked the R. Cartoons exaggerated it further. But parody only made it stronger. Every joke, every imitation, every mocking our matey only reinforced it. Pirates could be funny, scary, or ridiculous, but they all had to sound the same by the time Muppet Treasure Island arrived in 1996. With Tim Curry rolling his R's in full Newton fashion, the pirate voice had become a tradition, passed from one actor to the next like a cursed cutlass. Then came 2003, when Disney resurrected its own ride into a film franchise. Pirates of the Caribbean, the curse of the Black Pearl, exploded onto screens, with Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow. Depp didn't copy Newton entirely, but he didn't stray far. His slurred, drunken accent mixed rock star swagger with the familiar growl. The rolling R's and nautical slang still intact. Audiences loved it. Sparrow became iconic, and once again, the pirate voice was renewed for another generation. But here is the cruel irony. The more Hollywood gave us pirates, the further we sailed from history. Real pirates were Cockney, Irish, African, Dutch, French, Spanish, Creole speakers, and more. Their voices were a storm of languages. Yet Hollywood wanted clarity, a single accent audiences could recognize in an instant. They gave pirates one voice, one sound, and by giving us that, they took away everything else. Think of it. Children in Tokyo, Toronto, or Tunis can all growl a matey, and everyone laughs. The pirate voice became universal, but in that universality, it lost its truth. It erased the forgotten voices, smoothing out history's rough edges into a clean, cartoonish growl. It was, in a way, Hollywood's curse, the gift of immortality, bought at the cost of accuracy. And yet, perhaps that is what pirates themselves would have wanted. They lived by fear, by theatre, by image as much as canon. Blackbeard tied burning matches in his beard to look like a demon rising from hell. Calico Jack flew a flag with skull and crossed swords to terrify before a shot was fired. Why wouldn't pirates be delighted to know that centuries later, the world still trembles, laughs at the sound of their voices, even if distorted? Still, for historians, the loss is sharp. Where are the Cockney snarls, the Irish songs, the African creoles, buried beneath layers of fiction? Where is the chaos of real decks, the babel of tongues, smoothed away into one accent? And yet, there is one place they still linger. Every September 19th, Talk Like a Pirate Day erupts online. Millions post their best jokes, their ahoy, matey, quips. Most don't know Newton's name. Most don't know Cornwall shores. But they are speaking his voice, copying his ghost, carrying his exaggeration like a cursed inheritance. History may be buried, but the myth lives louder than ever. So when you hear that growl, think of what it hides. Think of the hundreds of real voices swallowed by time. And then ask yourself, has the myth stolen the truth, or has it given pirates the immortality they always craved? By now, you've heard the journey, from real pirate decks filled with Cockney snarls, Irish songs, African creoles, French curses, and West Country growls to the stages of Victorian London, the pages of Treasure Island, Robert Newton's thunderous R, and Hollywood's curse that trapped piracy forever in a single, exaggerated voice. But this story is not over. Because while the myth has sailed across the world, historians and linguists are still diving deep, prying open the wrecks of memory, asking one forbidden question: how did pirates really talk? And can we ever hear them again? The truth is scattered, like coins across a wreck site. Some lies in trial transcripts, where captured pirates' words were recorded phonetically. In 1719, at a trial in London, a pirate named William Fly spat curses at the court in speech so rough the clerk stumbled trying to transcribe them. His words dropped consonants, bent vowels, full of slang that doesn't appear in polished English. That transcript is a relic of a real pirate voice, raw and defiant. Other clues hide in sea shanties, collected by folklorists in the 19th century. Songs like Blow the Man Down and Whiskey Johnny were preserved with dialect intact. In them you hear Irish rhythms, Cockney slang, West Indian cadence. They are living fossils of pirate speech, sung long after the Golden Age ended, And then there are the Creoles, still spoken in the Caribbean today. Jamaican patois, Bahamian English, Gullah Geechee on the Carolina coastal, of these carry the DNA of the voices that once shouted on pirate decks. When a Bahamian fisherman says dem, tings, or a Gullah speaker says to see a boat, you are hearing echoes of the same speech patterns that filled Nassau's taverns in 1717. These aren't inventions. They are survivals. Linguists, with their tools of phonetics and history, try to reconstruct the chaos. They note how West Country rhoticity survived in American accents, why Americans still say car with an R, while Londoners lost it. They note how Cockney slang fed into Australian English, another sea-born dialect. They trace Creoles back to slave ships, to sugar islands, to pirate havens. Piece by piece, they rebuild the chorus. And when you listen closely, you realize the real pirate voice is still with us, hiding in plain sight, not in our, but in the languages we still speak today. Yet popular culture resists this truth. Hollywood's curse is strong. Even when historians correct the myth, the public prefers the growl. It is easier, more fun, more theatrical. Ask a child to talk like a pirate and they will roar, "Ah, matey," not sing in Irish cadence or shout in Creole rhythm. The myth is louder than history. But does that mean the myth is wrong? Think about it. Pirates themselves were masters of theatre. Blackbeard lit fuses in his beard, turning himself into a demon. Flags were painted with skulls and skeletons to terrify before a shot was fired. Pirates thrived on performance, on making themselves larger than life. So maybe, if they could look at us now, they would laugh. Maybe they would say, "Aye, so ye remember us by an R. Good, better that than nothing at all." Still, one haunting question remains. What if we could hear them again? Not the caricature, but the real voices. Imagine a time machine setting you down in Nassau in 1717. You push open the door to a smoky tavern. Instantly, the air is alive with sound. Cockney curses barked over spilled rum. Irish sailors singing bawdy verses, freed Africans laughing in Creole. Spaniards and Frenchmen bickering in their tongues, and yes, a few West Country growls of our punctuating the din. It is overwhelming, alive, terrifying. And suddenly you realize the myth gave you one voice, but the truth was all voices. The real pirate sound was not one accent, but the sound of the world colliding on wooden decks. And here is the final twist. That chaos never died. It lives on, not in pirate ships, but in us. Every time accents clash in New York streets, every time Creole rhythms roll through the Caribbean, every time English bends and mutates on new shores, we are hearing the same storm that once raged on pirate decks. The pirate voice is not lost. It is still here in the living, breathing chorus of global English. R may be the ghost, but the real treasure was the chorus itself. So the next time someone growls, "Ah, matey," smile, but remember, beneath that caricature are 1,000 forgotten voices, still whispering, still singing, still cursing, still alive in our speech today. The shocking truth is this: the pirate accent we all know is not false, but it is incomplete. It is one echo plucked from 1,000 voices. The real pirate tongue was not R, but the storm of humanity itself, chaotic, violent, and alive. And perhaps that is why we love the myth, because it is simpler, safer, easier to imitate. But the truth is richer. The truth is terrifying.